fitting fruit trees in a small space garden can be pretty challenging, but if you're gonna do it, then you need to know how to prune those fruit trees, especially summer pruning, because it's a little bit different than the winter pruning that we'll be doing later on in the season. And it may seem kind of counterintuitive to be doing any pruning at all at this time of year, because the general consensus is this isn't when we do big prunes on trees. There's actually a lot of benefits that you can gain from summer pruning your fruit trees. So I'm gonna show you exactly how I'm pruning my new backyard orchard. The way that this works is when we're pruning in the winter, we're doing it because we want a huge flush of growth in the spring, and doing these cuts actually allows the tree to use the stored energy that it's had all winter to kind of really do some very rapid growth in the spring. When we prune in the summer, we're actually inhibiting the growth of the tree. And there's a few reasons that you might want to do that, but most of them are just related to the space that you're in. I'm doing a method called backyard orchard culture, which, if you're not familiar with it, basically the concept is that we're taking these fruit trees, and instead of following the industrial agriculture standards for spacing that were really just designed so that tractors could fit in between these rows of trees, we're gonna plant them really close together. So in the spring, I planted 10 trees, and I planted them all within 3 or 4 feet of each other, which I got so many messages being like, you planted these trees totally wrong. And yeah, I planted them wrong based on these industrial agricultural standards. However, I planted them correctly based on backyard orchard culture. So the fact that the root systems are really close together will help to kind of inhibit the growth. However, there's certain varieties especially that will continue to have very, very rapid growth, usually like your peaches, nectarines, apricots, Japanese plums. These ones will just kind of get out of control and get really, really scraggly if you don't kind of do this summer prune to inhibit that growth a little bit. And I think there's also this common misconception that you're only pruning a regular size fruit tree once a year, but you can be pruning your fruit trees throughout the whole season as long as you're just looking for things that are dead, diseased, or disoriented. You want to be removing those as soon as you see them, so it's not a bad idea to kind of do a walkthrough of your little orchard at least once a month and kind of clean those up. But I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by that as I'm going, because we're going to be looking for those today too, on top of cutting back that growth to keep the plants a reasonable size. And the goal with backyard orchard culture is that we're making it so we get a larger variety of fruit in a smaller space. So I picked these 10 varieties really strategically so that I'd be harvesting a different fruit every month from May through October. And the idea is that we've got kind of a trade-off, right? We get less fruit, which is fine. I only need 50 of each variety. I'm not a huge, large-scale farmer. And we get a larger variety over a longer period of time. So it's just kind of a win-win situation. I'm gonna link my favorite company to grab fruit trees from down below, because it's almost time for, if you're gonna be planting new fruit trees, you can either do it in the spring or the fall, depending where you live. So you might wanna start, if you haven't already, planning what trees you're gonna get. But we're gonna head over to the orchard right now and I'm gonna show you exactly what we're gonna do. So when we're talking about summer pruning, the best time to be doing this is July or mid-August. I wouldn't do anything later than that, but it is going to depend a little bit on where you live. I'm in zone 6B. I'm doing this here in the middle of July. And the reason that we don't want to do this too late in the season is, although this is just a haircut to the tree, it is a little bit more intense than that. And if we wait too long, the tree won't have enough time to recover. And so it can sustain damage over the winter. So we want to make sure that it has a good few months to really bounce back from our haircut that we're going to give it today. And this one in particular, it's looking a little bit sad. I'm just finding that a lot of the leaves have been munched in one way or another. So this is something to keep in mind when you're doing your summer pruning as well. You don't want to cut a tree back hard that is already struggling a little bit. So it does have a lot of good whole complete leaves on it further down, so I think this one will be okay. Now, if you've never planted a fruit tree before, I do have a video going into exactly how I planted this particular orchard, and that will explain why these trees are kind of so short. But I did do a heading cut on them. So basically, as soon as I planted them, I ended up cutting the tree about knee height. I'm short, so I went a little above knee height. But you cut it about knee height, and that decides where your lowest branches are going to start. And in backyard orchard culture, the idea is that we don't even need a ladder to harvest, which when you have chronic pain and fatigue like I do is so amazing, because because that ladder is so heavy. But this kind of set our base height for the plant, and now we've just kind of got all this brand new leafy growth going. And one other thing that I wanted to mention is you'll notice a lot of these sticks are white, and in the tree planting video I also explained this, but this is basically sunscreen. It's an organic latex free paint basically that you put on a plant when you do these kind of aggressive heading cuts, because they don't have a lot of foliage on them in their first year since we did this aggressive cut. So it protects them from sunburn, but it's something that washes off naturally over time. And then the only other thing to keep in mind before we start cutting is that this is super tree dependent, right? So this tree is obviously like really bushy, has a lot of brand new growth on it, so we can cut it back a little bit harder. And that, like I said, is going to be the case with anything like your apricots, your nectarines, your plums, your peaches, basically a stone fruit. My fig tree, it barely put on any growth. It has 2 new branches on it, and I'm probably barely going to touch it, to be honest. I also want to say that there's no one correct way to prune. You need to kind of follow your own intuition with this. I know it can seem kind of overwhelming and intimidating and you don't want to make a mistake, but honestly, trees can bounce back from a lot and you will learn by pruning. For clippers, you want to use something that's very, very sharp, and best practice is to sanitize those blades in between every single tree so that you're not transferring any diseases from one to the other. If you have chronic pain or weak hand grip like I do from my arthritis, these particular Felcos are going to be a game changer because they have this rotating handle that takes pressure off your hand. I freaking love these. They have made this task so much easier. I will link them for you down below. So as our first rule of thumb, we're looking for dead, diseased, or dying. And because these plants are newer, we're just not seeing a heck of a lot of that. So after we're looking for dead, diseased, or dying, what we're gonna do, and I know this sounds crazy, but what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna cut down all this new growth by half. And when we do that, we wanna be paying attention to the direction of the branch that's growing out. So if this is our halfway point right here, we know that this is gonna become the new dominant branch growing this way. And I'm totally fine with that. So I'm gonna make my cut right here. And that's gonna be our cut for that branch. And we're gonna do a cut right here and right here. So it's just roughly halfway. Now this one has a branch growing straight up at the halfway point, so I'm gonna actually put it to this branch so that it can grow more out this way. These I consider to be more like sucker branches down here, and there's a Japanese beetle on these. So Japanese beetles are probably what's causing all the defoliation that I'm seeing on my fruit trees, but basically I'm going to be cutting off anything that's too low, that's kind of like a sucker-like shape coming right off of a branch. And then we'll go right here. Anything that's growing in toward the tree canopy you want to get rid of. And then we have this one. This one we'll cut back to like right here. Okay. So the tree looks a little bit scraggly again, but that's okay because it's gonna bush out from those points that we cut out. This one's kind of interesting because it didn't end up making growth from our heading cut that we did up here. And I don't really know what would have caused that, but the tree is just telling us that it wants to grow in more of a bush shape. So basically we only have this one branch. So give it a quick cut right past here. And this branch is growing straight up. This is what we call disoriented. So we need to get that off of there. And so this is really our only branch on this tree right now. So I'm interested to see what this one does next year. This is the Goldcot Apricot. And as you can see, like I said, these apricots go absolutely nuts. Like this is probably the bushiest plant that I even have out here. And it does have a lower branch here, but I just don't like it. I think it's too close to the ground for me personally. So we're cutting these off. Cutting off some suckers, these lower down little tiny ones. And then that leaves us with kind of the main canopy right here. And again, all we're gonna do is cut that new growth back by half. And when I say half, it's half of each of the individual branches size. But this one, we've got growing straight up, it's disoriented, so we cut that off right at the base of it. And I am making my cuts on an angle downward so that water can run off of these. It doesn't collect on them, which can encourage disease. And we just want to discourage that anywhere that we can. The last two. Okay. I do feel like these are still a little bit suckery. I don't really like these. This is my pink lady apple, and honestly the trunk was probably a little bit thicker than I would have liked it to be making this heading cut on. It's already over an inch thick, and generally you want your saplings to be about pencil thick, a little bit thicker to do a heading cut like I've done in this orchard to control the height, but I decided to take a risk with it. And it's done kind of an interesting thing here, but it does have some disease that we're gonna need to deal with and manage, and it has these upright branches that we really need to control. We're gonna cut back a lot of this diseased stuff. So the tree really wants to grow straight up for some reason. You really need to encourage it not to do that. And we got another straight up. So this branch was pre-existing, I remember, because I had it already painted, which means all of this is the new growth. So I'm only cutting back from here, not considering the entire length. So we're only cutting back new growth. This is upright, upright. And you will get to a point with this where you feel comfortable, but at first it may just feel like, oh my God, I'm decapitating this poor tree. This is the one that really got decimated by the Japanese beetles, and we're gonna be pretty aggressive while still being mindful of the fact that the tree is gonna need some time to bounce back and recover from being attacked. And there's just a lot going on here. This is straight up, so we don't want you here at all. This will kind of become our main dominant branch here. There's a lot of crisscrossy stuff happening. I'm not a super fan of, but I don't really want to go back any harder right now because of the damage it's already experienced. This one is interesting because it did form new growth off of our heading cut, but it went straight up and I really don't know why. So I'm gonna kind of give it an opportunity to bush out from this point rather than from down here, because there are some side shoots coming off of this that I think could become dominant if we let them. So I'm gonna cut it back right here, which is a bigger cut than half, but it feels right. And sometimes with pruning, that's all you can do. So now it can kind of start to form a V shape off of these main dominant branches and this one, and they're all facing in different directions. So I think it'll end up having a really nice shape. I mean, talk about wildly different growth habits from the last tree that we just pruned. This is a peach, and the peaches, they are wicked aggressive in their growth. They grow very, very, very fast. So we have a lot of work to do here. And when there's a big tree like this and we're getting overwhelmed, it's important to take it all the way down from the bottom to the top and just see where we end up. Right now, I'm mostly just doing my growth cuts at that halfway point, but I'm also looking out for branches that are crisscrossing, that are inhibiting airflow, that are keeping the tree from kind of thriving. We've got a lot of upwards growth here, and what we want to do is kind of get that trained so that it's pushing back outward more instead of up. Right now we just need to really get this growth back so that it can bush out more. Okay, this one really got hit by the Japanese beetles. We're gonna have to do something about that. This fig, it's really only got these two main branches, and I'm very hesitant to do much cutting on that end. So I'm just gonna kind of do the very tip. And this is where you kind of have to use your own discretion. I told you to cut 50% of the branches off. In a case like this, where there's been a lot less growth, we have to kind of make decisions based on the tree itself. It can be really hard when trees are this small to know exactly what to take off and what to keep. But our goals are always really just ventilation and increasing sunlight, because all of these things will help with growth and disease prevention. I would also recommend making sure you're not doing your pruning right in the middle of a heat wave or right before it's gonna rain, because those are gonna be open wounds on the plant that are more susceptible to fungal diseases that spread from the rain. I really like the shape of this tree. we're just giving it a haircut. This one's a little bit too upright. This one has a lower branch that is more out this way, so we'll let that take off. There's some disease here, so cutting that off. Some disease at the ends of these ones. The leaves on this persimmon are so glowy and pretty. We've got a little disease there. We're gonna cut that off while also cutting back our growth by half. This one I'm just gonna leave actually. And then this one's growing really upright, so we're gonna cut it all the way back to a bud here. Things are looking pretty good in the baby backyard orchard. I think that this is all that we'll need to do other than check on the disease on that pink lady apple. Let me know if you have any questions down in the comments below. I'm gonna link my favorite place to grab trees in the description. Thank you so much for gardening with me, and happy growing.